Hello, I'm Dr. Claire Brennan and I'm based at James Cook University in Australia's tropical north. Townsville and the lands on which I live and work are the traditional lands of the Bindal and Wulgurukaba people. My research concerns animals. Mostly I look at the history of hunting, but I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to talk about agricultural animals.
I'm Associate Professor Andrea Gaynor and I live and work on the opposite side of the continent to Claire in southwestern Australia. The campuses of the University of Western Australia are situated on Whadjuk Noongar land in Perth and Minang Noongar land in Albany, and we acknowledge that the Noongar people remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of that country. So I'm an environmental historian who has conducted research in a range of different areas, from cities to fishing to conservation. When we think about history, we usually think about people. But environmental historians expand the range of history to include environmental forces and non-human nature, including animals. So why should we make animals visible in our histories? Human and animal lives are deeply entangled. We love them, we hate them, some of us even eat them. They're with us all the time, but we don't always see them. So historical stories help us to make sense of these entanglements and perhaps reconsider our current relationships with animals. For example, history shines a harsh light on the causes and consequences of extinction. As we plunge into the sixth great extinction, the story of the passenger pigeon, which numbered 3 to 5 billion in the 17th century but was extinct by 1914, potentially does important cultural work. History also allows us to think through questions of proximity and morality in human dealings with animals. Looking over extended time spans, we can see broad shifts in the way in which people in different contexts lived among animals and how they thought about and treated them. For example, in early modern Europe, people lived in close quarters with both wild and domesticated animals. Even though within Christian thought God gave man dominion over them, animals were widely regarded as having independence and power. People kept, killed and ate animals for sure, but animals also killed or injured people, and they could be tried in a court and executed for their crimes. But by the 19th century, as human power over them increased, animals in Britain and Europe were widely regarded as property, as livestock or chattels, or in the case of pets, with sentimentality. So there was a broad social shift from seeing animals as agents to regarding them as objects. However, the truth is more complex, and relations with animals also depended on social factors. For example, in the 17th century, some scientists saw animals as machine-like, without souls or feelings. But farmers knew their animals as individuals. They gave them names, they'd talk to them, and they'd dress them up in bells and ribbons. So animals inhabited the same moral universe as their villagers. So we see that human and animal differences have always been important. But animal history isn't always about human understandings and actions. From the Black Death to Phar Lap, animals have made history too. So we write better histories if we attend to animals as historical actors. For example, European colonisation of other parts of the world wouldn't have been possible without animals. In the mid-1980s, historian Alfred Crosby painted an enduring image of European colonisers as the drunken ringmasters, who were aided and abetted by what he called their portmanteau biota, or suitcase biota, including the tough, fast, fertile and intelligent domestic animals they brought with them. In Australia, sheep were the shock troops of empire, expanding rapidly into the open grassy plains and woodlands managed by Aboriginal people. They destroyed the productive indigenous yam fields while giving colonisers a source of both food and export income.
What's really intriguing is we can see all these different relationships between humans and other species playing out in northern Australia in the pastoral industry. Now, Queensland is home to nearly half of Australia's beef cattle. And in the present, most of those cattle are of tropical breeds. They look different from European and English traditional British breeds of cattle. The cattle up here tend to be curvy rather than boxy. They have a hump in most cases. They have long droopy ears. They're beautiful, but they're definitely not British looking. And this did not endear them to farmers, to agriculturalists in the pastoral industry in Queensland. This type of animal was available well before it was widely adopted. A group of Brahman crossbreeds were displayed at the Rockhampton show in 1938. And what's intriguing about what happens at that show is that those animals were judged both alive and after slaughter. On the hoof, they placed 10th in the category. On the hook, economically, they they came second in the category. And yet they're not widely adopted. Even into the 1950s, people who show Brahman breeds or who engage as Brahman breeders are rejected. They're actually rejected from entrance to competition and shows. They're rejected socially by people within their industry who don't want to be associated with this new style of cattle. It takes a great deal of effort by the scientific establishment to establish a breed of cattle and have it accepted, a breed of cattle that's suitable for Northern Australia. And so in this particular example, in the 20th century, in the middle to late 20th century, we can see these elements of relationship and how complicated the relationships between humans and other species can be. And so it's worth looking at these relationships and unpicking them, because we might expect pastoralists to be purely economic beasts, but actually there's a strong sense of aesthetics, and as Andrea has said, there's a sense of love in the relationship between pastoralists and their animals. And we need to understand that if we're going to understand the history of Northern Australia in particular, but more widely of our species as it's unfolded, because we are so clearly related and dependent on these other species.